So we have a really interesting conversation about to take place here. It's certainly something that I know a lot of you are looking forward to, especially myself. So without further ado, we're going to jump right in here. So I want to introduce, this is a conversation, so I'm going to introduce our moderator. His name is Arvel Chappell III. He's Warner Brothers Manager of Emerging Technologies. Arvel's career has spanned space, artificial intelligence, cinema, and VR. He began his career in the space industry, and he currently serves on the IEEE Ethics in Artificial Intelligence Committee, which I personally think is awesome. He's a lover of cinema. He's a writer and director of short films and VR. He holds an MFA from my alma mater, the USC School of Cinema and Television. Arvel is part of the Emerging Technology Group, where he is leading VR and AR R&D projects, which are inventing the future of immersive content. So he'll be here to conduct the interview. And our interviewee today is none other than Zak Penn. Zak's career began as a screenwriter when he sold his first script, Last Action Hero, at the age of 23. Since then, Penn has become known for his work on numerous films based on Marvel Comics, including X-Men 2 and X-Men The Last Stand, Elektra, The Incredible Hulk, and most recently, The Avengers. He has also dabbled in other genres, writing scripts for disparate films such as PCU, Behind Enemy Lines, and Suspect Zero. Penn's shift into independent cinema began when he collaborated with his idol, Werner Herzog, on the script for Rescue Dawn. Penn directed and co-starred with Herzog in Incident at Loch Ness, his award-winning hoax documentary about the legendary director's attempts to make a film about the equally legendary monster. The Grand, Penn's second completely improvised film, was his third film with Herzog, and featured an eclectic cast including Woody Harrelson, David Cross, Ray Romano, Cheryl Hines, Dennis Farina, and Gabe Kaplan. In addition, Penn co-wrote the original story for Ants and produced the animated film Osmosis Jones. He's also acted in a number of independent films, including Star Max and Chuck and Buck. His first foray into television was the critically acclaimed and truly awesome original series Alphas, starring David Strathairn, and Penn also directed the documentary Atari Game Over for Xbox Entertainment Studios. He most recently has adapted the New York Times best-selling novel Ready Player One, which is required reading for everyone in this room. There will be a quiz tomorrow afternoon. The film will be directed by Stephen Spielberg, and it will be released in March of 2018. A much anticipated film and an even more anticipated conversation. So without further ado, please welcome Arvel and Zak.
Who's read Ready Player One? Just out of curiosity.
Not me.
So just to kind of set the stage here, I work for Warner Brothers, but I did not have anything to do with the production of the film, so I don't want anyone to read into any of the questions that I'm about to ask. Because don't read anything that's not on the screen. Where's my clicker? I'm supposed to have a clicker. Maybe I left it over here.
By the way, I like that you listed all my credits. That was very satisfying. Normally it's just he wrote the X-Men movie or something.
Okay, so we're gonna jump right in here. So, are you guys ready?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do it. Okay, so these are just questions to kind of get everybody warmed up of what we're gonna talk about. So, Intel versus Atari. Zak, what do you think?
You mean Intellivision versus Atari?
Intellivision,
Intel?
sorry.
I like Intel's chips better. Come on, it's Atari. I mean Atari, you know. I mean I liked Intellivision. I played a bunch of Intellivision, but Atari. In fact, I wouldn't play Nintendo as a kid because I felt like it had killed Atari. Obviously, I was wrong. I didn't know what had actually happened. But no, I'm Atari all the way.
Okay, that's a good segue. Next question, Mario versus Sonic.
I'll get killed for it, but Sonic, just because I would not play Nintendo. I have kids now, and so I've played some Mario, and I admit that they're excellent games, but I've played a lot more Sonic.
Okay, all right, keeping it moving. What is reality?
That's an easy one. It's a very good question what reality is. In fact, I think it's probably a lot harder to define or put your finger on than any of us really, once you think about it.
Yeah.
If any of you have seen Alphas, and this is not it's off the air, so I don't care if you watch it, but I get nothing from it. But I will tell you that one of the themes of Alphas is about, one of the things we kept coming back to is the fact that your mind mitigates reality for you in a tremendous way. That your vision, for example, I'd read a lot of Oliver Sacks and that had influenced me. Your vision lies to you every single second that you're looking at anything.
Right.
Everything is created. Your brain is a pattern recognition machine. So, it's something that we tried to do in the show is remind people that what they thought was really real was actually, their mind's interpretation of it.
So it's like your mind creates your reality.
Right. Much less whether we're, living in a real reality or a virtual reality. That I also don't know.
That's another good segue. Next question. What is consciousness?
I think consciousness, honestly, I think consciousness describes what's the right word for it? It's more of a condition that describes,
The interpretation of reality.
yeah, I think one of the problems with consciousness, and I have done a lot of reading about it, is that it's a semantic problem because people try to define, and I did not expect this to get so deep, but I think people do try to define consciousness as though it exists someplace, as though it is like a little thing inside you or the soul or whatever, and that's part of the problem. It's not, when you're talking about consciousness, it's it's like an emergent phenomenon that comes from complexity. I'm trying to be as jargony as everybody else.
Hamlet on the holodeck.
Hamlet on the holodeck. Is this Next Generation reference, or is this what's the question?
This is in reference to the book by Janet Murray.
Have not read.
Okay.
But Hamlet in Last Action Hero, that's the only scene that remained intact from my original script.
Moving on. If a tree falls and no one is around, does it make a sound?
I think it does, but I also think one of the most fascinating phenomena is the idea that there are important phenomena in the universe that only take place if somebody observes them. I mean, that's the trippiest. My brother-in-law is a physicist who's always criticizing my movies because the Hulk is not physically does not follow the laws of physics. But there are a lot of things that don't exist without being perceived. It's really hard.
I'm only about halfway through.
Wow.
Snow Crash.
Yeah.
Snow Crash, I have read. Great novel. Definitely. I actually, I read Neuromancer, I read Snow Crash. Those are books I read when they came out. Snow Crash, I think, that's one that I've wondered why they haven't made it yet. Now, of course, they're making it, and I'm not available and can't get a job. But certainly Ernie was tremendously influenced by Snow Crash. But I don't know what to say other than, incredibly prescient, and also, obviously Neil Stephenson turned out to be, he was not a one-hit wonder. That's for sure. So.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. Elon Musk. He famously said that we could all be living in virtual reality right now. So I just want to know what you think about that. We're here in Oasis Theater, but are we, in VR right now?
Well, I think it's a very interesting question, and it's something that it's part of the reason why I love The Matrix as a universe. Mm-hmm. It's part of what drew me to Ready Player One. The idea of what's the difference if a simulation of reality feels exactly like reality, mm-hmm. what is actually the difference? Mm-hmm. I also just have a lot of I went to SpaceX for a tour, and like the next week I bought a Tesla. I was like, I want to help that guy get to Mars. He's an impressive guy, and just to meet someone who's got a 40-year plan, that's pretty daunting. But
okay, here we go.
But I will say, what's the difference? Like, if we're living in a simulation, that's exactly like it's like that old Stephen Wright joke. I woke up this morning and everything in my apartment had been stolen and replaced with an exact replica. Yeah. So what's the difference?
Okay, this is another which side of the fence are you on? So we have Voltron here. So Voltron versus Gundam versus Power Rangers. Which side of the fence are you on?
Well, first of all, I'm 49 years old, so a lot of these things are like 5 years after. For me, it would have been Shogun Warriors. I gotta say Gundam.
Nice.
I've always thought Voltron was incredibly weird, that it's like 5 lions that smash together to become a robot. I mean, who came up with that? It's so strange. I like the Iron Giant more.
Last one. This is the best game in history. Tell us about this and your involvement in finding these games.
Well, by the way, I gave one of the first ET cartridges to Stephen Spielberg. I had it framed and gave it to him. My involvement was that a bunch of people did a lot of research and had found this guy, Joe Lewandowski, who had done all this research about whether or not these games were actually buried there, and the producers and people at Xbox, the very short-lived Xbox Entertainment, released one thing, which was Atari Game Over. I don't know if that's our fault, but they basically said, would you be interested in, and I just said yes halfway through, just that sounds amazing. And that's how I met Ernie, actually. And we just went out there and went to look for the games. You know what? There's a documentary about it. You can see why listen to it. You can listen to it from me.
And you directed this documentary too.
Yeah. No, I directed it, and it's funny. You'd be surprised how many people say, "Oh, really? I didn't know that was your movie." I'm like, really? I'm the guy who's in it the whole way. I'm the guy narrating. And they're like, "Oh, because I played, Atari when I was a kid. Did you?" And I was like, "Wow, you did not watch the movie closely at all." But that's not the first time. I mean, I've had people ask me that about Incident at Loch Ness. Like, "Oh, you were in that?" I'm like, "Yeah, I play Zak Penn." I think it's because I'm wearing a helmet.
Okay, that takes us past Act 1.
Okay.
So
Act 1.
keeping the screenwriter reference thing going. So we're gonna see the trailer now. For those of you who haven't seen it, let's see if we can get our technology to work. Let's see. There it is.
I was born in 2025. But I wish I'd grown up in the 1980s. Like all my heroes. I live here in Columbus, Ohio. In 2045, it's still ranked the fastest growing city on Earth. But sure doesn't seem like it when you live in the stacks. They called our generation the missing millions. Missing not because we went anywhere. There's nowhere left to go. Nowhere. Except the Oasis. It's the only place that feels like I mean anything. A world where the limits of reality are your own imagination.
So everyone go see Ready Player One. It's gonna come out in March of 2018. So, my tech is, okay, here we go. So the Oasis world seems like a playground for an artist. Like, how did you go about creating the world and working with the other filmmakers, working with Ernie? What was that process like?
Well, first of all, I got hired to write the script while I was making Atari Game Over. So I spent a bunch of time with Ernie talking about it before I started the rewrite. And it's an interesting adaptation. I mean, part of what you have to crack is the time that the novel takes place. You know, you can't. It's harder to do a movie that takes place over a year, and there's a number of other issues having to do with the contest. And so, as soon as I started to think about it, I started to think about all the places I would want to go in the Oasis, in addition to everything that Ernie has in the book. Ernie kind of cheats by having everything. I mean, he by the way, he's the same as an interview subject and the same in trivia, which is he can literally rattle off every single thing ever done within 10 minutes. So the book basically covers, if you've ever looked at the Wikipedia entrance for how many references there are in the book, it's astonishing. But one of the things that was key to us was, first of all, adding things that felt more like what would you want to do in VR without giving anything away. Certainly some of the stuff that people are already doing are the kinds of things that, I wanted to add and Stephen wanted to add, but also just filling in some of the in-betweens in the universe. But that said, there's a lot of great stuff in the book. And when Stephen came on, when I was hired, the hope was, I thought, this will never get made. And if it does, it'll be for $50 million and we'll never be able to do it. And then they sent it to Stephen, and I thought, well, that's crazy. He's never going to do it. And then he agreed to do it. And in the first meeting, he said, "Oh, we're putting everything back in. We're going to do all this. A distracted globe. We're going to do all this stuff." So I was like, "Yay! Let's do everything." So it's pretty exciting, and it's weird even to see that teaser because that's like the first 15 shots that came through, and it is so. I don't even want to call it the tip of the iceberg. It's like a drop on the tip of the iceberg.
Well, that's definitely good to hear because the trailer looks amazing.
Someone asked me if it was a car racing movie, which I think people will find amusing.
So, well, to me, the car chase is something that I didn't really remember from the book. However, that being said, there's a lot of scenes where, you're racing to a gate and trying to get there. So I can imagine, a scene where you have the Sixers racing everybody else to get to a gate. So, but can you tell me a little bit about the production, like the actual filming? What was different about filming this film versus a traditional movie?
Well, first of all, the first thing that was really different is I didn't get fired. Normally as a screenwriter, you're either someone else gets fired and they bring you in, or you write a really good script so they fire you. They say, "This is great, let's go make it," you're fired. On this one, it was an incredible experience. Stephen basically said, "You're going to stay on this from beginning to end," and we both agreed pretty early on. Since I already knew Ernie, I was like, "We gotta." Let's talk to Ernie the whole way through.
Yeah.
So once Stephen and I had spent like 6 months really kind of, re-cracking my draft of the script, we started pulling Ernie in on, okay, name some giant robots, name some, just throwing stuff out. What movies would Halliday have watched, in this week of his life? So it started like that, and then as we got closer and closer to production, we actually started bringing Ernie to set, to be there. In terms of how we made it, the thing is, this movie was made in VR. In fact, it was a very surreal experience that people would ask a question about a scene, and I'd say, "Okay, you see how you're wearing a virtual reality headset, standing in a volume at Digital Domain where you can see this entire environment and interact with it? Okay, that's what the Oasis is." Because a lot of people were confused, and I was like, just go stand there, and that's the Oasis if just, 10 years down the line. And that includes, Stephen scouted real world sets in virtual reality. So sets that they were building in London, they did a replica, and Stephen would, take his virtual camera and fly around the set and say, "You know what, take this out, take that out. Oh, what if we do this over here?" Because he's good at that. He knows what he's doing. He knows what shots he wants. So it was an incredible personal experience, but also surreal, because the book is about the process by which we made the movie extended and infinitum.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the different story structures? Let's get a little bit technical since I have a giant and a screenwriter here. So when it comes to a novel and story structure, point of attack, inciting incidents, all this kind of stuff that you have to deal with as a screenwriter, how was the process different, or is it different than the sort of story elements that you find in a novel?
Well, first of all, when you adapt a comic book, for example, which I've done a lot of times, comic books are as close to cinema as any other art form. I mean, the way sequential art, I shouldn't just say comic books, sequential art, period, that just the way you go from frame to frame, the way you have a page turn, etc. A novel is a completely different animal, and for example, a 3-page internal monologue, unless you're, Lars von Trier, is not all that helpful to the type of movies that I write. So you obviously can't do that. There's also a lot of, in Ready Player One, there's a lot of recapping of action and then discussion of it afterwards, because that's what's interesting. But you can't skip over what happened in a movie and then have everyone talk about it. Look, every novel has its own issues. Certainly with Ready Player One, the complexity of the contest and the complexity of the timeline and all of that had to be cracked in a way that you could do it in a reasonable amount of time. So I guess that was the key.
When you do these screenplays, do you fall in love with a particular character? And if so, in this particular film, who's your favorite character?
I tend to fall in love with the bad guy. I find that the best movies, one of the reasons I always like writing for Magneto is that I kind of see him, he's really kind of the hero. Yeah. Everybody else is kind of wrong and he's kind of right. He takes it too far, but often everything he warns Professor X is going to happen, happens, And to me, really good villains, I was just talking about this with Blade Runner. One of the things that's great about the first Blade Runner is that, man, are those great villains. You're so scared of Rutger Hauer at the beginning of that movie, and by the end of the movie, you're like, wow, he's the only decent person here. Truly. And so for me, one of the things I really tried to do, and part of it is I really like Ben Mendelsohn personally, was try to justify his behavior. Try to justify what he was doing and try to get into the head of someone running a corporation, with all these employees, and he has a bunch of kids who play video games telling him he doesn't know what he's doing. But that said, I don't think, you try not to. There's certainly other movies that I've written where there's some characters that are just a lot more fun to write than others. Yeah. This has a lot of fun characters to write. So.
Did you find one more? Or you mentioned the villain, but did you find any of the protagonist characters, more interesting than the other?
Not really. I mean, the truth is, the main character often has the most boring part. That's like one of the dirty secrets of being a movie star, is that you get the better part is the person playing across from you.
Right.
I don't think that's really true in this particular story because Wade goes through so much.
Right.
But one of the things that's really interesting about writing this movie is that every character is also playing a character within the movie.
Yeah.
And in some cases, if you know the book, more than one character. Because there's James Halliday, there's the virtual version of James Halliday, and then there's Anorak. Yeah. And those are three. Mark Rylance, it's good to have Mark Rylance to do it because those are three separate. One of them's two of them are AI and one of them is a real person. So, I don't remember your question, but hopefully.
Favorite? We mentioned before that Stephen wanted to keep all of the pop culture references that are in the book and also have them in the film. What is your favorite pop culture reference that's in the film?
Well, let me clarify that. He didn't want to keep all the pop culture references. He wanted to keep all the cool set pieces and all the expensive stuff. In fact, as you probably know, he said I had all sorts of jokes about Close Encounters and Jurassic Park and E.T., and those all had to come out of the script. My favorite, my favorite pop culture reference that I can tell you about, I can only tell you something that's from this trailer. It's lame, but I'll have to say the Iron Giant.
Okay.
But
Freddie was in that too.
Yeah, but I mean, the Iron Giant, you know, I would produce this movie, Osmosis Jones.
Yeah.
And they were making Iron Giant at the same time, and they called me and the writer of Osmosis Jones in to watch a rough cut of the movie, you know, half finished. And they said, tell us what you think of this. And we like walked out with tears in our eyes saying like, that was the best movie I ever saw.
Wow.
What are you guys doing? Like, how come we haven't even heard about this movie? It was amazing, you know? And they're like, oh, really? Yeah, okay. And then it just got dumped. And so, to me, I've always felt like everyone feels this way. That movie did not get the credit it deserved. So I was pretty psyched to bring it back.
So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. So for those of you that don't know, Zach is also working on a film in the Matrix universe, and currently writing that. Is there anything you could tell us about that?
I mean, I can tell you it's not a reboot. That I'm not going to write a new version of the first Matrix movie, which is as perfect a movie as you're going to make. I'm not going to try to do anything that the Wachowskis already did so well. But I think like Ready Player One, you know, the Matrix is kind of a flip side version of it. Obviously, even Ernie would, you know, admit it. In fact, we used to joke it would be funny if, at the end if you revealed that all of this movie took place inside the Matrix. That doesn't happen. By the way. That's not the end of the movie. But all I can tell you is I think it's one of the best ideas anybody ever had for a movie, and they created this entire universe, and they, you know, if you've seen the Animatrix, they created these amazing, they gave their universe to all these other people and allowed them to tell their own stories, and there's a tremendous mythology there. And I am not a fan of just, oh, you know, remember that popcorn machine we all had as kids? Let's make a movie about that, you know? Someone once pitched me in the 90s, Sorry, the movie, based on the board game, which was, I'm not going to tell the whole story, but you can guess what my response was. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, so I forget. So where were we?
I think this conversation has been so engaging. I had all these visuals to go with these questions, but we kind of got behind here.
Oh, Matrix, yeah.
There we
I
go.
can't really
Now-
tell you
now we're
anything.
caught up.
Is the answer. I mean, I get in trouble for telling you.
Yeah,
that.
I understand completely. So the film takes place in 2045, and you know we're here at a VR conference, and you know the big question of the day is, will we get VR to the point where we can experience an oasis? So I want to get your thoughts on that. Will we ever reach the point where we have oasis type immersion in VR?
I mean, I can't imagine we won't.
Yeah.
I mean, even when we were researching the movie 3 years ago, we were seeing haptic stuff that it seems like it'll probably happen sooner than
Right.
Ernie predicted, is my guess. Yeah, I mean, it's not that far away,
Right.
you know? And in a lot of ways, what's good about this is material and suits Stephen's style as well, because he really likes to ground things in the real world, you know, is that, you know, a lot of this is pretty much the way people use the internet anyway, you know, it's just expanded, it's just visualized. So, yes, I'm sure we'll get there.
So, you know, there's been a lot of talk in the VR community about empathy and empathy we get in cinema and being able to feel the emotions that the director is directing. The screenwriters write it first, obviously, and the directors are able to get from the actors in the scene. But that's somewhat kind of lost in video games. It's somewhat kind of lost in interactivity. So as a screenwriter who's worked on many films, who's worked on video games also, to now imagine VR and what that means for the storytelling process, is that something that is a challenge, you think? Or how are we going to get more empathy into VR? As a screenwriter, how would you reimagine story structure or all of that to try to make it work?
Well, maybe I'll be proved wrong, but I think they're two completely opposite experiences. I think I play a lot of video games. I do not want a director directing I want to be able to shoot everybody everywhere I look. And I want to be able to go where I want to go, and I want to feel like it's me, I'm in control.
Right.
You can't make a movie that way. That's not how movies work.
Right.
You know, the second that, you know, in fact, I've had a lot of people present me with VR, you know, what they're calling VR narrative experiences,
Right.
where they're like, look what we did. We cleverly kept you from looking this way or that way or the other way. And I'm like, you're fighting against, the whole reason I wanted to put on this VR headset is so I could look anywhere and go anywhere,
Right.
and you're basically just making me watch a movie.
Right.
Just put a movie on a screen and I'll watch it in VR.
Exactly, yeah.
I actually think this is a problem even with video games. I have never watched one of the cutscenes that I wrote for any video game because I don't want to watch the cutscenes. I want to play the game. You know. Now games have gotten better. The story is woven into the game, but I really do think, you know, I think VR is a tremendous, like, of course there can be storytelling within VR. There can be storytelling within sports contests. There can be storytelling within anything. But the idea that someone's gonna magically unlock the secret to telling a conventional story or a narrative story in VR seems to me like it's like making, I think I said this the other day, it's like, oh, we made a phone that's also your shoe. You know, it's like, okay, well, I didn't want that. I have a shoe, and that's not what I want my phone to be. So, that said, I think AR can be tremendously helpful to the cinematic experience could be expanded in ways. I actually think a really cool thing would be as people if people stop going to the movies, which I hope they don't. One thing I could imagine is putting on a VR headset and going to a virtual Cinerama Dome and watching with a whole bunch of, everyone agreeing we're going to go to the 8 o'clock show. That to me is better than sitting at home watching it, or as our kids do, watching it on their phone.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So that's not what people talk about a lot, but I think that could theoretically work.
So I want to stay on this topic a little bit because it's something that has gotten so much attention, and because we're in a cinema universe now. Cinema is a dominant form of art, arguably, but VR is here, and we imagine VR to be all of this stuff that we see in films like the one that you just made. But how are we going to get there? Because obviously we're not quite there yet. The tech's not quite there yet, but also the art hasn't really matured. What do you think it's going to eventually get to? Like, what is your dream for VR in the next 5 years?
Well, by the way, I've seen some amazing VR stuff.
Yeah.
I've seen a concert experience that was amazing. I saw that Beck one years ago, which even then I thought was amazing. I actually think VR is, there's some tremendous stuff that's happening, and the games are great too. I mean, I've been to that IMAX art embarrassingly many times. I go with my kids and I play more than they do. So I think that's not the issue. I would guess that the issue is more, when's everyone going to have a VR headset?
Yeah.
When is it not going to make people nauseous, et
Right.
cetera, et cetera. But I don't, frankly, I think the haptics are probably the more complicated issue. I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but I would guess that when you look at, the processing power and the things that they can do, even the way we make movies, there's stuff in the Oasis where we would sometimes argue, and someone would say, well, could they really do this? And I'd say, we're doing it. What do you mean, could they do this in the Oasis? Literally, that's what we're doing right now. We're looking at a monitor showing us a created, perfectly rendered 3D world.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, I'm going to get a little philosophical again. Sorry,
Okay,
guys.
that's all right.
So, this book, Sapiens, how many people have read this?
I have.
So, in this book, they talk a lot about how we got to where we are today, with all the technology developments and everything that's happened, and how we came from being an animal to being the brightest and able to make tools and being able to make virtual reality and all these things. And a big part of that was being able to tell stories. So stories has been a big part of us being able to give history and knowledge on to our next generations. So because VR is here now, because we can actually give an experience to another set of generations, what's going to happen to the evolution of humans moving forward, do you think?
Wow.
Sorry guys, I had to go.
I was told there would be no math on this. Well, first of all, I think storytelling, don't get me wrong, that's my job, is to be a storyteller. And as I said, I think our brains are programmed to look for story. So storytelling is never going to, people are like, oh, all they're going to do is sit around and, they're just going to play Pokemon, all day. People always need stories. Your brain thrives on a story, and that's how it thinks about things. That said, I think VR is like you know, it'll be a testimony to experience, and it'll create new experiences that I don't know that. I'm trying to think if it'll change people. I mean, I guess theoretically it could change the way, you know, if VR could get to a point where the experience was so lifelike that it literally caused all the same chemical reactions in your brain and in your body, then the question would be, then you'd get into a really interesting ethical question, which is, well, what's wrong with, if someone could go hang gliding in VR and it was virtually identical, if you did a brain scan, it was identical to someone hang gliding not in VR. And by the way, if they didn't know whether it was in VR or not, is one word, you know, it's like when, you know, my parents would say, stop playing video games. But if I was playing Monopoly, they were fine with it, you know, and I would point out to them. Or if I was watching TV, they were fine with it. And it was just, so I don't know. I don't know what it's going to do. That's too hard a question. I have no idea.
I want to take some questions for the audience. You guys have any questions for Zach? Can we arrange, do we have a wireless mic here? Okay, there. Okay, I'll just repeat it. What's your question right here in the front?
Yeah, with movies like The Matrix and a lot of movies that just have a lot of VR elements already, were there things that you tried to do to make it even more cutting edge? Because you've kind of done a lot of cool stuff already with like movies. How do you make Ready Player One and you know, in 2018 still cutting edge?
Well, I think the difference between, you know, in terms of making it cutting edge, first of all, Stephen Spielberg was in charge of this movie, and which was awesome. And his approach is not, oh, I'm just going to wow you. His approach is, I'm going to make you believe what you see. I'm going to make you feel like you're there. So in terms of, I would say there's more of a focus on making you believe that the Oasis exists than on coming up with ways, like things that you can't do now that you would be able to do in the Oasis. There are things like that, but it's more just, you know, Stephen was very focused on the real world aspects of this. I mean, for those of you who've read the novel, a lot of the end of it takes place in, it's just kind of a run to the end in the Oasis. And Stephen was very intent on keeping everything intercut so that you're never losing track of the real world. So I would say that's more his focus. You know, in terms of the experience of watching the movie, it's still going to tell you a story, and if you don't like it, you won't like the movie, and if you do like it, you will. So,
Thanks.
Okay, I want to take one from the back here. This guy right here. Yeah. Speak loud.
So Ready Player One, the era that it happens in is one that is about 80s, let's say, and it's a PG or PG or whatever it is. How did you even consider, like, how did you weigh it out for like kids not doing their homework versus, you know, is this movie made for 40-year-olds or is it made for 15-year-olds?
The question, just to repeat it for those who didn't hear it, is has to do with the 80s and the fact that the movie, first of all, it's not set in the 80s. The book is filled with 80s references. As you can tell from the trailer, Halliday's character is obsessed with the 80s, but the idea that the Oasis, if it was ever built, would be 80s references left and right. Even Ernie, you know, we all agreed, even in the book, that's not, it's just more that the characters are focused on 80s stuff. Our goal, I mean, I grew up in the 80s. If you've seen Atari Game Over, you know I'm like the perfect audience for Ernie's book. But even I felt like, yeah, this shouldn't be a quiz. This shouldn't be like, you shouldn't watch this movie and it shouldn't be like, oh, what is that? If I don't know who Freddy Krueger is, that doesn't make sense to me. I mean, as you can see, that's a good example of, if you're gonna shoot someone in a death match, you might as well have them wear a cool skin that's from something, right? But they're not all 80s references, and some of them aren't references at all. So they're just, you know, things that we came up with. But it definitely, if it's not a movie for everybody, everybody will be disappointed. I mean, the goal is to write a movie that my kids will be psyched to see, that I will be psyched to see, and you know, my parents might not, but you know, but short of that, I think it should theoretically appeal. You know, it should appeal to anyone who wants to see an adventure. You know, I mean, in the same way, Matrix, it's like, yeah, it has an aesthetic, but it's not just if you're goth, you'll like the Matrix. You know, like it's a cool movie no matter what.
Is the new one still gone?
Yeah, that probably people are.
Okay, I'm gonna stop it there. We're over time, but Mr. Penn, thank you so much.
Appreciate it. My pleasure.
Everyone go see the movie, March of 2018.